Welcome to the Sponsored Rider Club podcast, where we unlock the secrets to motorsports sponsorship. Here's your host, Josh Weesey.
Welcome to episode 45 of the Sponsored Rider Club podcast, which is powered by ImpactFuel.org. My name is Josh Weesey, and I am your host. I'm here to help guide you through the complexities of motorsports sponsorship. Tell me with that today. We have our featured guest, Dylan Merriam. He's a supercross and a motocross racer. You're going to find out a lot more about him when we get into the podcast. But before we do that, I have some requests for you. First off, I'd love to get your feedback and also show iTunes that we're very serious about this podcast and we have engagement from our audience. So if you would please head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review. Also, whatever podcast player you're on, subscribe. That way you don't miss any of our upcoming guests, specifically Bob Luketic of FCR Suspension. He's our next guest. And also Factory Polaris Razor Racer, Cody Bradbury. Beyond that, Thomas Affelt of Sledders R Us is also coming up in the podcast, and many more. If you want to get some insider access to some of our upcoming guests and also just be able to interact with some of these folks, ask questions, get responses, get feedback on your specific scenario, go ahead and search the Sponsored Rider Club on Facebook and request to join. I will personally review that request. And pretty much, if you have anything to do with motorsports, I'm probably going to accept it. Let's just be honest. All right, if you have questions or guest recommendations for this podcast, go ahead and shoot me an email, podcast@impactfuel.org. I do review all of those emails and respond to all of them. This episode is sponsored by three awesome companies. The first is SolderWeld. We met them out at the 2017 Vegas Arena race, and they are looking to change the motorsports industry with their metal bonding technology. TopThePodium.com, we interviewed them on episode 2, and they're experts in motorsports sponsorship. And then Bold Racing and Suspension, family race team. They know a thing or two about custom UTV, ATV, and dirt bike suspension. We also interviewed them on episode 39. Now, structure of the podcast, similar to previous ones. It's like a race. We'll begin with the qualifier, which is a basic introduction. In Heat 1, we'll dive into Dylan's background. In Heat 2, we'll talk about sponsorship, tactics, and strategies. Then in the main event, we'll discuss the proper mindset that's required to have a successful sponsorship. And then we'll end at the finish line. We'll get closing comments and learn how to contact Dylan. Without further ado, let's hop in. Dylan, I'd like to start off with you giving us an intro about yourself.
I'm Dylan Merriam. I'm 20 years old and from Corona, California, and I like to ride dirt bike.
Awesome, man. Well, I plan on digging in deeper to your background here in Heat 1. I want to start off with your story. So I want to know how you first got started in motorsports.
Well, my dad used to race back in the day, and when I was 3 years old, he bought me my first bike. And, we started riding and racing a little bit. Didn't really take it too seriously, but just did it more for the fun of it. But then when I turned about 10 years old, we started taking it more seriously.
Okay. So when you first got your bike, and you said you did a little bit of racing, when did you actually start racing? Do you know what age?
I would say it's probably about 5 years old, I think. Might have
Okay.
been my first race. Don't quote me on that, I guess. But, yeah, it was around that.
Oh, it sounds good. It's always amazing hearing this story. People are probably getting sick of me commenting on it, but like when people are starting riding, 3 years old or whatever, it's just nuts, man. It blows my mind. My brother, he started riding dirt bikes when he was 4. He couldn't even ride a regular bicycle yet, and he was on a dirt bike, and I thought that was good. And now I talk to people like, 3, I was 2, I was 2 months old, like.
Right.
Like day 1, I was on a dirt bike ripping across the yard. I couldn't even hold my neck up. Like, oh, okay.
Exactly.
But that's cool. But I mean, another thing too for people listening right now. I mean, I also there's people on here that don't start racing until they're much older. Like Cynthia Gauthier, she's a Monster Jam driver now, but she raced motocross. She didn't start racing until she was 18. That's when she formally started motocross. So.
Oh wow. Yeah, and I think Jeremy McGrath even started really late too.
Yeah, yep. And a guy
Yep.
that I interviewed, he's actually one of the sponsors for this podcast, Jimmy Moore. He was on episode 39 of this podcast. He didn't start legit racing until he was 45 or 44, something like
Oh
that.
wow.
So yeah, and he got into UTV racing and he tried motocross. He's like, nope, not motocross. And he hopped inside a UTV and he's killing it right now.
That's cool. It's never too late.
No, it's never too late. Definitely. Well, cool. So let's kind of walk through that path a little bit. So you started racing when you were kind of 5-ish, and you got a little bit more serious when you're 10. Let's hear the next steps and what happened from like age 10 till now over the past 10 years.
I was climbing up through the amateur ranks little by little. Kind of quietly. Didn't really stand out. Maybe some top 10s here and there, but slowly worked my way up. And now this year was my first year of pro.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was a long climb, but I feel like I got to a pretty good spot now. So
no, that's awesome. Take us through maybe a couple of the different series that you raced, from then till now.
Oh, there was a lot of local racing, like
Yep.
Trans Worlds here and there, and then we started doing the Freestone National, Oak
Okay.
Hill National. The amateur ones, and then Loretta Lynn's we did 3 times. Yeah, just all those Minios we did a few times. So we started traveling towards the last like 3 or 4 years. We started really doing the traveling and
Yep.
competing and stuff like that.
Very cool. And then just for people listening right now that might not know, what series are you racing now?
We just finished up with the Lucas Oil Pro Motocross,
Perfect.
and before that I raced the 250 East Coast Supercross.
Yep.
Unfortunately, had some injuries throughout the outdoors, so I was only able to race about 2 races throughout the year.
Yep.
But yeah, it still went pretty good.
So I think you would have been here, but were you at the Ford Field race? What time? I can't remember what time of the year that would have been, but in 2017, over at Ford Field in east side of Michigan, around Detroit.
Yep, Detroit Supercross. Yeah.
I was there, so
Yeah,
I
that
watched
was,
you. Yeah.
Yep.
I was cheering you on. I just didn't know it at the time.
Yep. Speed and starts were on point, but man, I kept hitting the deck. So that was an up and down weekend, but we learned from it, so it was good.
That's important, man. It's only a failure if you don't learn from it. That's it.
Exactly.
Man,
Win or learn.
That race, I believe, was wild. Like, I just remember it being both the 250s and the 450s. Just like the main events were unreal.
Oh yeah, that 250 main was insane. Unfortunately, I watched it from the stands.
Yeah.
But my good friend Jordan Smith won.
Yeah.
So that was big.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that was an absolutely amazing event. So
definitely.
Well, cool, man. So you're racing now. Tell us a little bit about your bike.
So right now I'm riding a Yamaha 450, and I was on a Yamaha 250 for the East Coast Supercross.
Yep.
And then I transitioned over to the 450 for outdoor. And then I unfortunately got hurt at the first round that I raced at Glen Helen in the first moto. But took some time off and then came back and then had another little injury. So it was an up and down year. But yeah, I finished out the series on a 450, and that's what I plan on racing next year.
Oh, perfect. So if you do Supercross again, you're going to try 450 class?
Yes.
Oh, perfect, man. Man, I remember back in the day, gosh, this is probably early McGrath racing days. There was like one thumper out on the track racing, and everybody's like, "Oh, look at this guy out here with his old 4-stroke. Like, these things are never gonna be in racing." And
right,
it's just a whole nother thing. Just like, I mean, when the Polaris Razors first came out, the people are like, "Oh, look at this golf cart, tooling around."
Right.
That's no one's gonna ever take that seriously.
Right, they won't compete with our rhinos.
Right. It's something else.
And now they are number one.
now they're everywhere too. Absolutely everywhere. Including in my garage. There's one in there right now.
That is nice. That is nice.
Well, cool, man. So one thing I want to know about, I mean, what would you say if would be some like key experiences that you've had or key accomplishments that you'd like to share with the audience?
Coming up, not my last year at Loretta Lynn's, but 2014 at Loretta Lynn's was a huge accomplishment. I won the Schoolboy 2 class. And that was my first big AMA championship. And that moment changed me for sure. It was huge. And then we went on, and then I'd have to say the next biggest accomplishment, maybe even the number one accomplishment, was making my first main event at the Daytona Supercross this year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Daytona's a big deal, too.
Yeah, and it was my first one, so I was really happy with that.
Yeah, definitely. That's phenomenal. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I mean, now that we know you a little bit better, I actually want to transition into heat, too. But right before we do that, I'd like to take a minute to thank the sponsors for this podcast. I am constantly asking the guests of this podcast how they attract and retain sponsors. And on almost every single occasion, somebody gives an example of a resume. A rider or a racer resume is extremely important to your overall sponsorship pitch and proposal. And it's tough to do. I mean, it's not really the easiest thing. Anybody can go through and put together a resume, so don't get me wrong there, but it's really difficult to get something that's unique and different and stands out, and that also is something that can be put across multiple platforms. Well, that's one of the things that I want to talk to you about next, is how topthepodium.com can actually help you build a race or rider resume that can be used on multiple platforms. I'm talking website, PDF, something you can print off that's interactive, that looks fantastic. It looks absolutely professional. Well, that's because it's made by a professional. This is the type of thing that's going to set you apart from the crowd, and that's going to position you for a strong sponsorship proposal. So what I want you to do next is go to topthepodium.com, and if you have a question, there's a little chat icon that pops up on the side of the screen when you go to topthepodium.com, and you can go ahead and type your question right there. Jeff Vanestal, he is the owner of Top the Podium. He's going to be able to respond to you directly, so check it out. Have you ever been out on the trail or at the track or in the middle of the desert and something breaks? Well, of course you have. We've all been there. But a lot of people at that point, they reach into their trusty toolbox for the duct tape or the zip ties or wrenches to fix their machine. However, there's a feeling that you get when you realize you need more than just duct tape to fix that rock chip in your radiator. That's a horrible, horrible feeling to have. And that's why I'm going to tell you next about SolderWeld's metal bonding products, specifically alloy sol. So this product gives you a longer term fix than JB Weld, which is just going to get you back to the trailer or back to the pits. With basically the assistance of MAP gas or propane torch, you can quickly and easily repair an oil cooler, radiator, AC line, or any crack or hole in aluminum. And better yet, alloy sol flux is the only flux in industry that cleans and decontaminates the dirty and greasy surface for you. So you don't even have to worry about that part. The alloy sol rods are actually capable of a 30,000 PSI fix, and they're stronger than even the parent metal, and they're built to last the lifetime of the part. So don't let a simple radiator leak leave you out of the race or broken down in the trail. Bring along some alloy sol aluminum alloy repair rod and flux from SolderWeld. I think you will all agree with me on this one. One of the most critical elements to a successful racing setup is your suspension. And that's why we're going to talk next about Bold Racing. So Bold Racing is a family-owned business that grew up in the racing world, and they specialize in providing cutting-edge custom suspensions with exceptional service at a great price. So if you're in the United States and you're looking for a custom setup for your race machine, whether it be a dirt bike, a UTV, or an ATV, get a hold of Bold Racing. All right, so I'm going to start off by giving you a phone number. The phone number is 702-506-5354. You can also email them bold.racing@yahoo.com. And yes, they are available on social media. Check them out on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Or if you just have any questions, feel free to email me, podcast@impactfuel.org. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're now on Heat 2, and we're going to dive into sponsorship tactics and strategies. So let's start off, Dylan, by you kind of walking through some of your current sponsors.
Yeah, some of my current sponsors are TPJ Racing Team, Fly, Alpine Stars, Dedicated Ride Company, Von Zippers, DSC Construction, Fit Aid, CrossFit by Overload, ODI Grips, The Brop Shop, Engine Ice, and Lucas Oil.
Oh, that's awesome. Whenever I hear the list of sponsors, there's usually a couple that I like to pull out and just understand a little bit better. There's some that I think when people hear, like, they can see the connection. They can obviously make a connection as to why that company might be sponsoring a rider. Like Lucas Oil makes perfect sense in a motocross industry. But what about this? You said Von Zippers. What's Von Zippers,
Yes.
and how does that connect with your racing program?
Well, Von Zipper originally was a sunglass company, and they have a motocross line for goggles.
Oh.
So basically, yeah. So those are the goggles that I run, and everything for the goggles they make, very quality.
Then that's very obvious. Then okay, I thought that might be some. I don't know what I thought it was, but that I guess is still obvious if they're making goggles. What about, you said another one that was Dedicated, and I didn't catch the second word.
Dedicated Ride Company. It's a clothing company.
Yep.
It's a smaller, up-and-coming and growing clothing company.
Yep.
The owner, Scott, has helped me quite a bit throughout
Awesome.
Supercross and outdoors, and he's a good guy.
Oh, that's cool. And so one thing I also like to call out is when people have, smaller sponsors, because there's a huge market out there. I mean, there's a ton of small businesses that are looking for someone to grow with. There's obviously a couple of big name sponsors that everybody's aware of. Red Bull, Rockstar Energy. People all know about
the ones
those
we
ones.
dream of.
Yeah, but I mean, there's so many other small companies that want to work with you and grow with you, and I think it's great to partner with those people.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a lot of those are the ones that help us the most, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It's like one of the companies that, actually both of the companies that right now that are sponsoring these podcasts, TopThePodium.com and Bold Racing, they're both smaller companies, and it's really nice. I can talk directly with the owner, and we can make strategic plans about, what podcasts we're going to share and how we're going to share it, and what other guests we're going to bring on and how we're going to grow it. And it's really cool having that, like, really personal connection with a smaller company.
Yeah, it is. There's definitely more of a relationship there. It's not just business. So I do like that.
Certainly. Well, the last one that I want to kind of pull out of your list there was CrossFit. So tell me a little bit about your relationship with CrossFit.
So I've been doing CrossFit for about 6 years. And that's basically, I'd say, a big part of what got my conditioning and fitness up to where it is now. Definitely the structure. And there's a CrossFit gym down in Temecula called CrossFit by Overload. And the owner, John, is very interested in motocross. He rides, and he has a good relationship with the CrossFit headquarters and the guy that runs that. So he helps me a lot. I go down there, work out at his gym. And he helps me a lot, for sure, as far as the training goes.
Oh, that's perfect. This is the part in the podcast where I start digging in to understand how some of that, like, initial contact happens. So, maybe take us into a couple of examples, and whether it's the CrossFit or Dedicated Ride or any of the other ones. But can you share a couple examples of how you actually made contact with some of these sponsors?
A good one is Dedicated, and I'll start with Dedicated. Dedicated, I've always wanted a clothing sponsor, and I noticed a lot of riders and privateers were running the last few years, even good riders. Jimmy Dakotas, I believe, is on the team too. And I really liked their clothing, so I reached out to the owner, and it was getting close to Supercross season, and I just reached out to him and I said, hey, I introduced my name and said, I can send you a resume. I'd really like to run your stuff. And he's like, yeah, for sure. So we met up. I met him, and we had a good conversation. He got me all hooked up with clothes and everything, and helped out with some money and stuff throughout the Supercross season.
Oh, that's awesome. I like that you said you met in person too. I mean, that's definitely something when I do talk to people about how they make contact. Making contact sometimes might be simpler. It's then building that relationship, and I think face-to-face interactions are a really good step in building a relationship.
For sure. I feel like first impressions are very important, and I feel like it's easier to make the connection in person. When it's over the phone,
Yeah.
It can be taken a few different ways over text, and you don't really know who you're dealing with over the phone. So it's definitely good to meet in person, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible that nowadays we have to actually talk about that. Like, we have to remind ourselves that in person does add value. I imagine if we were doing this interview, well, we wouldn't be, because this is the podcast and this technology didn't exist, 15 years ago or whatever. But I imagine
exactly
15, 20 years ago, like our conversation right now would be all about face to face, or, writing letters, or, driving somewhere and knocking on doorsteps. And now it's almost like we have to remind ourselves that that's an option, right? Because social media is so powerful, email is so powerful.
Oh, yeah.
It's incredible that how much things have changed.
Exactly. It really has.
And I imagine, like, 20 years from now, people are going to be looking back on this podcast like, what is a podcast? Like, this ancient,
right? What's that all about?
Yeah, what's that about? I mean, they didn't just like enter into the feed in their brain and like automatically make a connection with a sponsor. Gosh.
I know.
Cool. Well, that's a cool way to make a connection, and it sounded like it was pretty straightforward. And honestly, I feel like you don't have to be in like California or, one of the big hubs of the racing world to have access to a smaller company clothing brand. Like, there's probably, people can think of right now, someone within their state or within their region that they could access fairly easily.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, cool. What about another example? I think you said that you also had at least one other one to talk about.
Yeah, similar scenario. The other one was Von Zipper. I sent the guy an email and, said, hey, I'd like to get on your program. And he said, yeah, for sure. Come down to the office and I'll introduce you to some people and we'll see what we can do for you. So I went down there. I met him, the main rider support guy. And at the time it was Pat Lopez. And he introduced me to a lot of other people in the office. And we went into his office and he basically told me that he could get me on the program for Supercross, and we figured out all the details, picked out some goggle frames and stuff like that. But yeah, it was definitely good to meet him in person as well.
Yeah, that's cool. And I got a couple of follow-up questions about that same experience. So, you said you emailed the person. Like, how did you know either their name or their email, or, who was the right person to talk to? I mean, how did you even get to that point?
I believe I got the guy's email from a mutual friend of mine who was friends with the main guy. I was looking for a goggle sponsor, and I know a while back a friend of mine, Kyle, said, hey, I got a good hookup with, actually at the time, he said, I have a good hookup with Spy. So I said, okay, could you get me, I messaged him, a few months later and said, hey, is there any way you could get me on with Spy? And he said, hey, unfortunately, I don't have that connection anymore, but I'm good friends with the guys at Von Zipper. So he's like, here's the guy's email. So he sent me the guy's email, and I emailed Pat. And actually, I believe I texted him. And I had his phone number, and he was super cool, replied super quick, and was like, yeah, come down. So, yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's good. What did you prepare for, or I guess maybe how did you prepare for this type of conversation? I mean, I imagine, especially at this time, maybe you're not even, I mean, you're 20 now, right? So maybe you're 18 or something. How do you prepare for that? What did you do?
Kind of just, was myself. I I'm pretty good at conversation and stuff like that. And I don't know. I kind of just, I went there and just kind of went with the flow.
Oh, that's good. I think you already said you had a resume, right?
Yes, I had one made.
Okay, so you already had a resume at that time. I'm assuming you brought that with you, but I just picked up another thing when you said, did you make your own, or did someone else help you making the resume?
I had a online resume, so it was
Okay.
a PDF file that
Yep.
I would email to people.
Perfect.
I could have printed it out, but I had sent it to them ahead of time, so I didn't have to take it with me.
Yep.
But a close family friend of mine had made it for me. She's really good with the computer and stuff like that. So she said, anytime you need anything, let me know. So she updates it for me and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's perfect. We've talked about this kind of stuff in the podcast before. If you need a professional resume or something that looks pretty good, or if you need like really good photography, or you don't always have to start with an expert. There's almost always somebody in your network that would love to just, like, they might be trying to build their brand as a photographer, or their brand as, a graphic designer, or their brand as, like a resume builder. So there, you might be able to leverage somebody within your current network, and then maybe once you're ready to move to the next level, then you can start bringing on some of the, the bigger professionals and things like that.
Exactly.
I think it was even last night. So for people listening right now, we're recording this episode on September 19th of 2017. And last night I got in a conversation on Facebook in the Sponsored Writer Club, and we were talking about logos and things like that. And, we basically said, like, hey, what are some examples of logos that are out there, and how did you get a hold of them? And there was a couple people like, oh, my boyfriend, he's studying graphic design. I think that was Sierra Romo. She's a UTV racer. She's like, yeah, my boyfriend's a graphic designer, so he made me a logo. And then someone else was like, yeah, I just made one myself, and and it looks pretty good. And then there was another person that was like, yeah, I paid somebody through a company to make this beautiful logo. But it's just like, there's so many options out there, and all of them ended up working in some way, shape, or form.
Exactly. It's nice when you know somebody that does graphic design or is really good on the computer.
Yeah,
it's a win-win.
Yeah, and there's almost all I right now, just thinking off the top of my head, I know people who do that stuff. I'm actually that person for somebody else. I've had people reach out to me and say, hey, I know you kind of make logos here and there. Like, can you make me a logo? And like, yeah, sure. I mean, for you, no problem. So yeah, it's good. It's good to leverage that network.
For sure.
Next thing I want to do is just kind of ask you, like, how would you recommend somebody do it? So, I mean, if someone's right now is listening to this podcast and maybe they don't have any sponsors, I mean, how would you recommend that they start that process?
First off, I think, social media is pretty big, but any way you can get in contact with the person, preferably, to meet with them in person if you can, I think that's the best way to go about anything.
Mm-hmm.
It puts a face with, what you're asking, and I definitely think that helps.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the things we talked about seems like it went pretty well, but I'm hoping that there's, example that you can pull out of a time when it didn't go that well with a sponsor. And specifically, I want to know, what did you learn from that? So without getting into company names or anything like that, do you have an example of that?
I don't think I've ever actually had a bad experience with a sponsor. I don't.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, no. Yeah, typically anyone that I reached out to, I ended up getting on with them. So, yeah, I haven't had a negative experience.
Have you had a time when you were turned down, like when you did apply for something, either you didn't hear back, or, you got a rejection letter or whatever, anything like that?
I can't think off the top of my head of who, but I do know that I definitely got in contact with somebody, and I believe they said that their program was full, but, to try back, because at the time, I think it was too late in the season is what they had said.
Mm-hmm.
So their budget was already full.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I guess what I learned from that is be more the timing, the timing of it. I waited too long. when the season ends, resume season really is like September, October, latest. So I was just a little bit behind on the time, and I missed out on that window. But I mean, it depends on the racing that you do. For us, resume season is, August, September, maybe October. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, you made me dig a little bit for that one, but we did end up getting to something that maybe didn't go as well, and we got there. I had to get my shovel out and the metal detector and start digging, but we got there.
All right.
That's a really important thing. I be honest with you, I had a similar experience. I don't even know. This was probably about a year ago, and I was trying to find some sponsors for Impact Fuel, which is just my business that I run as part of this podcast, and it runs off of sponsorships as well. And I met with a sponsor. We had a great face-to-face conversation, and it was the same thing. I went through the whole spiel, and basically at the end they're like, yeah, we already have our budget established for next year, so come talk to us next year. Around this,
exactly.
around September time frame.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know about that. So I didn't even think about it. But yeah, I mean, even just like I was telling people a little bit ago, it's September 19th, 2017 right now. I just saw a notification, I think yesterday, where I think it was FXR Moto is starting to do their resume intake for the 2018 season.
Yeah, it's hard because, for most of us racing motocross, supercross, or even amateur nationals, this time of year is pretty dead. So, you think, oh, I'm not racing till January, so I don't need to, get in contact with people till December, maybe
right.
November. But it's really quite a bit ahead of time is what you need to get ahead. You got to be on that. Unfortunately, sometimes it's hard, but yeah, you got to be in tune with that for sure. The timing's everything.
Yeah, definitely. I interviewed Jim Beaver on episode 4 of this podcast. He's a UTV racer, and he also races trophy trucks, but he does podcasting and all that stuff. But he'll finalize. I think he was finalizing his 2018 sponsorships in January of 2017. So he's working at least a year out. I mean, he's doing some pretty big contracts. But he's looking at least minimum 1 year out, and he's probably that's just concluding his deals for 1 year out. But he's still working on deals 2 or 3 years in the future, and that's that's pretty awesome to be that strategic.
Yeah, it's hard to be on the ball with that big of a time difference, a whole year. But yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's incredible. I'm still trying to figure out tonight, how am I gonna find my way from the basement where I'm recording to bed? I haven't figured that out yet. But Jim Beaver's working on 3 years out sponsorship, so it's pretty amazing.
Definitely.
Well, cool. Well, we mentioned social media a little bit, and I always talk about social media in this podcast because it's a big deal right now. I mean, it's a pretty unique way to gain access to people. So what is your social media strategy? Tell us about that.
When it comes to, sponsors and reaching out to them, I try to just send a direct message.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, sometimes they'll get back to you. Sometimes it takes a while, or sometimes they won't, But I haven't contacted a whole lot of people through there, maybe, a few, and I've been pretty lucky. But as far as, when it comes to the posting and stuff like that, I might be a little bit behind on that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about it, though, because, I mean, there's some people that they might hear some of the things that you think you want to improve on, and maybe they're thinking the same thing about their own. I mean, nobody out there is perfect. I mean, there's some people are really good at social media, and some people, aren't quite sure what the next step is. So let's start by maybe talking about what are some things that you're unsure of, if it's good or bad, and go from there.
The one thing I probably slack on the most is, posting and kind of advertisement stuff for the sponsors. Like, I might slack on that a bit. When I do post pictures of myself, I tag all of my sponsors, and typically I'll try to arrange them, like in order of everything. But yeah, as far as like I could probably improve on like posting pictures of my stuff. Like, for example, just say fly racing, like my new helmets, gear. I could probably take pictures of that, post it, and like say, everyone check out this new line of gear, stuff like that. I definitely, I slack on that. And I can definitely improve on that.
Yeah, I think that's a tough one, right? Because it's, you're trying to show the product off, but you don't want to become a salesman, or at least you don't want it to come across as being like ingenuine or anything like that. And this is something that, Anna Glennon, and we talked about this on her episode. She was on episode 40, and she was telling us about an example of she got like a new pair of boots or something, racing boots, and she did, instead of like taking a picture of just the racing boots, she took a picture or like a little video of her doing, I don't know, I can't remember, some like goofy dance with the boots on, and that kind of stuff, people pay attention to, and it, I don't think she specifically said like, these boots are amazing, buy some of these boots. It was more like, hey, I just happen to be wearing these awesome boots while doing something that's funny. So I think that's tough.
Yeah, that's definitely better.
Yeah. I think it's, honestly, if we were watching like television or something, you'd call that product placement. You'd say, the people who are on TV and they're drinking a Coke, but they've got the Coca-Cola label turned towards you so that you can see that while they're drinking it. That's basically what it is.
Exactly. It's more of what people want to see.
Right. I always hear good things. Are you familiar with BJ Baldwin? He's a trophy truck racer.
I'm not super familiar, but I do know the name.
Well, definitely. I want you to take this name down and look at some of his social media. And he does these he does all sorts of crazy stuff on social media. He's got a ton of followers. He gets really into his personal life, but he's always has, some sort of either shirt or a hat, or like the background has something in it that you can kind of relate to his sponsors. Like, it's pretty cool. It's pretty unique how he's able to do some of that stuff. So that's a person that when I've asked people who I think are good at social media, like how do they do it and who do they look up to, they say BJ Baldwin as one of their people that they think does a really good job at that stuff.
I'll definitely have to check it out.
And one thing interesting about BJ Baldwin is he doesn't necessarily go out there and just like win races. He does. He competes well, but he has some really serious sponsors, but he is not usually a top contender.
But he's probably one of the favorites.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When I went to a Vegas to Reno race recently, and I was like, I got to get a picture of BJ Baldwin's truck. Like, I got to. And, I had to fight to go like to where he was at, and he was not up front. He was not in the starting pack. I think he finished like 26th, but that was the truck that I wanted to show people.
Right. Yeah.
Well, cool. So digging in a little bit further, social media. What are the platforms that you're on right now?
As far as like
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
I'm on Instagram and Twitter mostly. I have a Facebook, but I don't really post to it, which is another thing I probably should. But they have the thing now where you can literally link all three of them together. I just haven't done it yet.
Yeah,
but I need to get on that.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about the link thing on episode 4. One caution point with using the linking tool is, and I'm thinking right now that I actually linked something earlier today and I didn't go through and update the tag, so darn me for that. But one thing, if you're using a linking tool, go back through and update your tags so that they connect to your sponsors properly, because otherwise it just shows on Facebook. If you link it from Instagram to Facebook, it's just going to show the @ sign and then no linkages, and then their page is never tagged. So that's just a quick little note.
Yeah, that's good to know.
I'm slapping my hand right now because I know that I messed that up like an hour ago before before doing this podcast, but
At least you
um,
remembered it's fixable.
but I remembered it, and I think I'll remember to fix it once we're done with this episode.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about more about Facebook, because you're not drawn to Facebook. Obviously, you're spending your time on other platforms. So tell us a little bit about maybe why that platform isn't really drawing your attention.
I don't know. I feel like there's, it's more of, and like, no, not to, how should I say, offend anyone, but like Facebook's a lot of like, people's drama and like,
Yeah.
stuff going on in the world and stuff like that, politics, all that, to
Yeah.
where I feel like Instagram and Twitter are a lot more personal, and just like more direct. There's a picture with it typically,
Yeah.
based off of who you follow, what you're going to get, about. So
I thought you were going down the age demographics thing there by saying that it's just old people use Facebook.
no, there's a lot of young people too.
I thought that's where you're going. I mean, I was just I was prepared for it. But
So we'll say
yeah.
Facebook is 40 plus.
There you go. Yeah. We'll put an age range on it. Yeah. No, I think it's interesting. I'm curious of where Facebook's going to be at in the next couple of years, because the way that they control the flow of information is really it's really strict, and you see people with 20,000 followers or something on a Facebook page, and they do not get a ton of traction when they post something. So it's really interesting.
It is. But they're
Yeah.
updating things. They have Facebook Live, and like they're trying to stay up with the times, but I feel like it's just a little bit behind.
Yeah. Have you ever done Facebook Live?
I have not.
That is something that I've said it on this podcast before, and I still continue to not do it. I just haven't done it, really. I mean, I did it once. I know that's where Facebook wants you to go. Facebook Live is going to get a higher priority for the Facebook's algorithm than a regular video or regular post, and I just don't do it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and Instagram has the live feature too, but
That's
I always
right.
feel like I'm going to be that person that is on the live, and there's one person watching you, and it's kind of like, this is kind of awkward.
Yeah, I just haven't done that either, so I got to get over some.
I haven't
I
either.
think there's some personal fears there. You got to get past.
Exactly. That's a new level of confidence.
It is. It really is. Just like
it really is.
I mean, you and I talked about this a little bit in the pre-interview, and actually a lot of guests in the show asked us beforehand. We're like, "Is it live?" I'm like, "No, live. Is this podcast live? Absolutely not. Like, I'm not ready for that." But
right, you can't fix the mistakes when it's live.
Right. Yeah, it's yeah. So it's definitely a confidence thing, but I'm hoping that I get to a point where I'd love to interview somebody, honestly, in the motorsports world that is good at Facebook Live, because so far everybody's
For
like,
sure.
I don't really do much of that, or I stay away from that, and
Exactly.
yeah. Well, cool. Well, so outside of social media, what are some things that you do to kind of like market yourself or market your sponsors?
I mean, when I'm at the track, or I'm talking to anyone about, they're like, oh, how do you like those boots? How do you like that gear, helmet, stuff like that? I always try to speak very highly of my sponsors, and I'm not just saying that because they are my sponsors. I actually believe that their product is great. So I try to sell people on it like that. Refer people like, hey, you should try these, you should buy these, stuff like that. I'd say that's about as much as I would do outside of social media.
Yeah, definitely. When you are at the track and doing some of that, I mean, when do you find time to do it? Is it before the race? Is it after the race? I mean, when do you have time for those conversations?
With people, or just or with the social media part?
With people, yeah, outside social media, like when you're just kind of at the track.
Honestly, any time of the day, you could ask me on the starting line. You could ask me before the race, after the race. I really don't mind.
Perfect.
So typically in between motos, in between races, stuff like that, or before or after, kind of everything, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's good.
For sure.
That's good. Is there something that you would say that you kind of market that's differentiating for you, like something that maybe is a little bit unique that you kind of sell, whether it's on social media or in person or on a resume? I mean, do you have something like that?
Nothing I could think of at the moment. No, that's a tough question.
Yeah, and I mean that's why I ask it. I think I
Yeah.
have an idea for you. I want to while we're chatting, I want to quick pull up your Instagram again and look at it because I have kind of an idea of what you might be accidentally marketing and just not know it. Let me
Ooh,
take a quick look.
accidentally.
Yeah, so okay. I just looked at a couple of your pictures on here, and like there's a
Okay.
couple of spots where you can tell that you're physically fit, right?
Uh-oh.
And
Uh-oh.
you also have CrossFit as one of your sponsors.
I do.
So maybe that's one of the things that you kind of do is like, hey, I'm happen to be in good shape, and hey, I happen to appreciate taking care of myself, and maybe I happen to use CrossFit. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's a connection
Okay.
there.
That was well said. Okay.
But I mean
Maybe.
that's something that you might be doing things like that and you're just not aware of, and probably people listening right now do things that speaks to them, and they might
Mhm.
not even know that they're marketing some unique trait that makes them stand out.
Yeah, I would say that because I'm unaware. I think a little bit.
Cool. Well, maybe I just made it up too. I mean that wouldn't be the first time that I've just made stuff up.
Hey, it worked.
If you say things with enough confidence, other people might actually
It's believable. Exactly. Exactly.
Cool. Well, hey, next thing I want to do actually is dive into the main event and talk a little bit about mindset. The reason why we talk about mindset in this podcast is I know that there's like some mental preparation and things you have to do to kind of get your mind right. So I want to talk a little about that. And the first one that I'd like to discuss is an obstacle. So can you give us an example of a time when you had to overcome like a big obstacle in your motorsports career?
Could an injury count?
Yeah, I mean, definitely.
Okay, because back in March 2015, I broke my tib fib, and it was definitely an ugly injury. And that took me a long time to overcome. A lot of it was mental, not being comfortable, sticking my leg out and stuff like that. It was just hard. And especially the way I broke it. It wasn't a big crash. I just landed on it wrong. So that was tough, but, I just mentally had to clear my mind and just let it go and just focus on what I was doing before I got hurt.
Well, what are some of the things that went through your mind, while you're hurt? I mean, what were some of the thoughts that you had?
Before I started riding again,
Yeah, exactly.
kind of just, how would this happen? Why would this happen? Like, why do I do this? There's always
Right.
question. I feel like anyone who gets hurt kind of goes through that little phase where they're like, gosh, like how much longer can I keep doing this? Especially when you've had a long string of injuries. But I feel like any person that, has the will and the drive and stuff, you reel yourself back in and you make it happen. So, yeah.
One of the coolest stories I think I've heard around somebody coming back from an injury in motorsports and making the best of it. There's actually two that I can think of. So one was Nate Riggins. He hasn't been on this podcast before. I've actually been on other podcasts with him, and he told the story of how he got into I think it was a street bike motorcycle accident. But either way, it basically paralyzed his arm. So he lost use of I think it was his primary arm. And after that, he was like, you know what? I'm going to start racing ATVs. And he literally got on a four-wheeler, I mean, for the first time in his life, and started racing ATVs. I mean, he modified it, like he rigged it up to have the throttle on a different side, and
Oh, wow.
he had no way of using front brakes. He still doesn't. He actually races with just rear brakes, and it's amazing. He actually does good. I mean, he's getting like top 10 finishes, and
That's
all
cool.
of it was Yeah, and he just told himself, I'm not giving up.
I think it's more the self-accomplishment that's huge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, might not be the results people think on paper, like, oh, it's not that good, but for him, that's awesome.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And the
and
story
another one,
behind it.
yeah, it's an awesome story, man, and he uses
It
it.
is.
Like, he uses that story
For sure.
and uses it to market himself and his sponsors. Like, people want to sponsor this guy. Like, I
sure.
get it.
That shows passion.
Definitely. That reminds me, I need to get Nate on the show, man. I gotta give him a call.
For sure. That's a good story.
And another one, I interviewed George Hamill on episode 23 of this podcast. He started off racing motocross, and he got a bad spinal injury. And, I mean, he lost most of the use of his legs. And that's tough, man. You're a motocross racer, and he was young, and, you know, he had a good career ahead of him. And he just said, you know what? I'm going to race UTVs. And, you know, he changed up his strategy, and now he's like Lucas, you know, he's racing Lucas Oil. He's doing phenomenal in his Yamaha YXZ, and like he's got an amazing race program. And I mean, he could have just given up.
For sure. Yeah, that's awesome.
Cool. Well, hey, sorry, I went on a couple of rants there. You must have got you hit like a passion.
Good stories.
You hit like a passion point for me or something, but so I know that you can't do all this stuff alone, right? So who would you say has been like your biggest supporter?
Definitely my parents. You know, they've paid from everything. They paid for everything since day one, and they've stuck behind me through, you know, all the ups and downs, and they've been there the whole time. So they would definitely be on the top.
Mm-hmm. You know, one thing that I just thought about after you made that response was I asked that question to everybody, and it's almost always parents, but it's always different reasons. So I've literally had somebody, I think Amber Balkin, she was a NASCAR driver. She was just on episode 41. She said something about her parents because they didn't pay for anything. You know, her parents forced her to get in the sponsorship early on. But same thing.
Wow.
And so it's just interesting kind of like looking at the different perspectives, because you're grateful, right? You could have been not grateful. You could have not mentioned your parents right now, but you're like, no, they helped me. They supported me. They gave me the things that I needed. And she was the same way. She could have been frustrated with her parents. Like, why didn't you help me? Like, why didn't you give me these things? Other people are getting these things. But I think it's all about the mindset and the perspective you take on it. That's most important.
Definitely.
So, similar note, but still different question. Who inspires you the most?
Definitely my dad. You know, he's always a big work ethic, and, you know, it makes me want to work hard too, you know, in every aspect of life, even away from motocross and stuff like that. So, yeah, I would definitely say my dad.
Good deal, man. So, I think it's tough sometimes to plan for your next move, but, you know, I like to ask this question just to understand where people think they're headed and how they know that it's the right direction. So what is next for you in motorsports?
That's an easy answer, because the way our pro racing goes now, there's only two things. So the next step is definitely to start preparing for the 2018 Monster Energy Supercross, all 17 rounds of that. So that's what's next.
Awesome. Yeah, that's cool. And now you're switching into 450 class, so you got a lot to prepare for.
Definitely. It's a big change.
Cool. Well, how do you know that's right? I mean, how do you even know like staying in motocross is right, the right direction?
It's, you know, it's what I want more than anything, and I feel like I have a lot of capabilities to make it happen, and I have a good program and good people around me to, you know, ensure that we're going in the right direction. From my parents to my trainer to the team owner, you know, just everything. So I feel like I have a lot of people looking after me.
Yeah, perfect, man. Cool. Well, hey, next thing we're going to do is kind of wrap up at the finish line. So what would you say is one key takeaway that the audience should, remember from this conversation?
I think what stands out the most would be to surround yourself with good people, and good things will happen. You know, it's all about, you know, you put yourself around good people, you know, it's positive, all that. You know, you don't want to get caught up in the wrong crowd or anyone who's going to stand in the way of what you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. There's a quote that one of my favorite podcasters, John Lee Dumas, closes every one of his podcasts out with. He says, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with," and I think that's just very true in this case for sure.
Definitely accurate. Yes.
Cool. Well, people listening, if they're hearing you right now and they want to know more about you, I mean, how do they connect with you?
I would say definitely, through social media, Instagram and Twitter, mostly Instagram, I would say is the best bet for sure.
Perfect. What's your Instagram handle? If you could share that with folks and they can easily look you up and find you.
It's pretty easy. It's Dylan_Merriam.
Perfect. Well, cool. Dylan, thanks again for taking the time on this podcast to kind of share your experience, share some advice, and really just have a good time. So I will leave you with this. Have fun and ride safe.
Thank you so much. It was fun.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Sponsored Rider Club podcast. Make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss any of our upcoming guests, like Bob Luketic of FCR Suspension, Cody Bradbury of Polaris Razor, and Thomas Affelt of Sledders R Us. And while you're at it, head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review. A special thanks for this episode goes out to our 3 sponsors, SolderWeld, Bold Racing and Suspension, and then also TopThePodium.com. Make sure that you're following the Sponsored Rider Club podcast on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So check us out there. We're always posting updates, keeping you well informed. Last thing I want to talk to you about is Impact Fuel. It's an online community aimed at turning your riding experiences into sponsor-funded charitable donations. By simply posting your mileage or your podium on social media and tagging or mentioning Impact Fuel, you're essentially creating a financial donation for Impact Fuel's featured charity for that month. And you don't even have to give any actual money. Between the sponsors and Impact Fuel, we take care of that financial donation for you. You just have to ride, give, and repeat. To find out more, visit impactfuel.org or check us out on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Until next time, have fun and ride safe.